January 22nd, 2026. Texas Governor Abbott declared the state's power grid had never been stronger, and he promised there was no risk of blackouts. But within 48 hours, a federal emergency order warned the grid was too weak to meet demand, and tens of thousands of Texans lost power as winter storm chaos unfolded. If leaders saw the disaster coming, how did Texas end up here again? Arctic air swept into Texas before dawn on Friday, driving temperatures in Austin down to 16 degrees Fahrenheit. Dallas braced for 36 hours of freezing rain, while the National Weather Service issued alerts for 132 million Americans across the country. Ice began to coat tree branches and power lines from the hill country to East Texas, setting the stage for widespread disruption. By Saturday morning, utility reports confirmed more than 46,000 Texans were without power. Tarrant County alone counted 8,000 customers in the dark, while Bowie and Shelby counties each reported around 5,000 outages. In San Antonio, CPS Energy tracked 14,500 homes and businesses offline by early Sunday. Oncor, the state's largest utility, deployed 10,000 field personnel and contractors, racing to restore service as ice accumulation brought down lines faster than crews could repair them. Meanwhile, the ERCOT dashboard showed demand surging past 70,000 megawatts Saturday night, but the grid's reserve margin remained thin as the storm intensified. That afternoon, the U.S. Department of Energy issued an emergency order under the Federal Power Act. The order authorized ERCOT to activate backup generators at major data centers, stating its purpose was to mitigate blackouts in Texas. Energy Secretary Chris Wright called the situation a national energy emergency, warning that generation capacity was far too inadequate to meet the nation's needs. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation said ERCOT was at elevated risk for winter outages, underscoring the growing strain on the isolated Texas grid. As the storm pressed on, the gap between state assurances and the reality on the ground became impossible to ignore. February 2021 stands as the darkest benchmark in Texas grid history. That winter, a polar outbreak crippled the state's power system. Over 4.5 million homes and businesses lost electricity, some for days on end. Official records counted 246 lives lost, most to hypothermia, some to carbon monoxide, others to house fires sparked by desperate attempts to stay warm. The economic toll soared to $195 billion, with frozen pipes, ruined crops, and shuttered factories rippling across the economy. Wholesale electricity prices spiked to the legal cap of $9,000 per megawatt hour, draining city budgets and leaving residents with staggering bills. Investigations after the storm found that the natural gas system failed first, setting off a domino effect that took down power plants across the grid. Promises of reform followed. State leaders pledged to winterize critical infrastructure and ensure fuel supplies, but the technical record tells a different story. Since Uri, Texas added more than 30 gigawatts of solar and 17 gigawatts of batteries. Yet only 3.1 gigawatts of new natural gas capacity came online, barely moving the needle for dispatchable power during frigid nights when solar sits idle and batteries run dry after a few hours. In December 2025, policy analysts at the Texas Public Policy Foundation released a report titled "Fool Me Twice." Their modeling showed peak winter demand had jumped 20% since Uri, while the amount of firm on-demand generation, natural gas, coal, nuclear, remained nearly unchanged. The report warned that in a severe winter event, outages lasting more than 12 hours were not just possible, but likely. These warnings landed just weeks before the current storm, raising urgent questions about whether the lessons of 2021 had truly been learned. Texas invested heavily in new energy sources after the 2021 disaster, but the numbers tell a complicated story. Since then, the state added 31 gigawatts of solar power, enough to light up millions of homes on a sunny afternoon. Battery storage ballooned by 17 gigawatts as well, promising a cushion for sudden spikes in demand. But when bitter cold settles in before dawn, solar panels sit idle in darkness. During the winter's harshest hours, before sunrise and again after sunset, solar output drops to zero at the very time demand for heating surges. Batteries, while impressive on paper, are built for short sprints, not marathons. Most can discharge at full strength for just 2 to 4 hours. In a prolonged freeze, that window closes quickly. Once depleted, batteries must wait for daylight or surplus grid power to recharge. Resources in short supply during a statewide emergency. The backbone of winter reliability remains dispatchable generation, power plants that can run on demand, regardless of weather or sunlight. Here, growth has lagged. Only 3.1 gigawatts of new natural gas capacity came online since 2021, barely nudging the total available for deep winter nights. Energy analysts point out that natural gas still supplies more than half of Texas's electricity. Yet the ratio between variable renewables and firm, fuel-based generation has shifted dramatically. The grid may boast more total capacity, but much of it cannot answer the call when Texans need it most. As the storm deepens, the limits of this resource mix come into sharp focus. Inside control rooms across Texas, engineers watched as the numbers on their screens told a story at odds with official confidence. ERCOT's dashboard, updated in real time, displayed a headline figure: 92,778 megawatts of available capacity against a demand of just over 70,000. On paper, the margin looked solid, but beneath the surface, a different reality unfolded. The cold did not simply drive up demand, it attacked the machinery itself. At dozens of thermal power plants, sensors began to register falling output. Water lines feeding boilers froze solid. Valves and pressure gauges exposed to the wind jammed or cracked. Plant operators reported derates, forced reductions in generating power, as critical components iced over. What began as minor slowdowns escalated into partial shutdowns. Natural gas supplies, the backbone of Texas electricity, became unreliable as wellheads and pipelines froze in the Permian Basin. Even plants, designated as winterized, struggled to bring fuel to turbines. Operators scrambled to reroute flows, but each workaround came with delays and losses. The official reserve margin, meant to guarantee a cushion against the unexpected, masked the true strain. Capacity numbers counted every generator as if it were fully available, even as dozens limped along at half strength or less. ERCOT's public dashboard offered reassurance, but internal logs documented a growing list of units unable to deliver their rated output. By Saturday evening, the illusion of surplus faded for those inside the grid's nerve center. Each mechanical failure, each frozen pipe, narrowed the options. The headline numbers no longer reflected what the system could actually deliver if the freeze deepened overnight. For plant crews on the ground, the challenge was no longer theoretical. It was a race against the cold, with every hour of sub-freezing temperatures shrinking the margin for error. Governor Abbott's assurance, just 2 days before the storm, now stands in sharp contrast to the federal emergency order. How did state officials determine there was no expectation whatsoever of any loss of power when ERCOT's own weather watch flagged higher demand and lower reserves? What specific data or internal advisories were presented to the governor before his press conference? Did ERCOT or the Public Utility Commission receive updated risk assessments as the storm approached, and were these shared with the public? Why did the state highlight natural gas abundance, knowing that more than half of Texas's electricity depends on fuel sources historically vulnerable to cold? With the Department of Energy stepping in to authorize emergency backup generation, what was the basis for such public confidence? These questions demand not just answers, but the release of internal analyses, dashboard logs, and advisory memos that shaped official statements in the critical hours before the outages began. Official records and policy documents must be made public. The Department of Energy's emergency order, issued January 24th, should be published in full, along with ERCOT's internal logs and the weather advisories from the days before the storm. Release of these materials would clarify decision-making and expose any disconnect between public statements and technical warnings, bringing much-needed clarity. The Public Utility Commission winterization audit reports, required since 2021, should be published for every major power plant, detailing which sites passed, which sites failed, and which sites received exemptions. Texas law mandates minimum reserve margins, but enforcement remains inconsistent, and a clear accounting of compliance is overdue. Fuel supply contracts for natural gas generators, especially those designated as critical, need independent review to ensure backup arrangements are real and not just paperwork. Legislators can act by requiring third-party verification of winterization and fuel readiness, and by strengthening penalties for non-compliance. Independent review would make obligations enforceable and verifiable. These steps turn unanswered questions into concrete demands for transparency and accountability, giving Texans a path to hold their leaders and grid operators accountable. Today, millions of Texans still depend on a power grid that falters under pressure, despite record investments and repeated warnings. As demand grows and winters intensify, reliability is not a slogan, it is survival. Accountability is not optional when lives are at stake. What would you demand from your leaders?